A log cabin in West Virginia, built in 1892, still has its original pine floorboards. No rot, no warping, no electric dehumidifier, just a bucket that cost about $4 to set up. And once you fill it, it pulls moisture out of the air for weeks without using a single watt. The secret isn't just the stuff inside, it's how the bucket is built so it can run forever with almost no attention. I'll break that open later. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to assemble that same system for any room in your house, plus a couple of zero-cost tricks that work before you spend a dime. I'm going to start with the free stuff, air movement and furniture placement. Then we'll move to a $2 rock salt setup, then the $4 powerhouse that Appalachian families actually relied on. After that, I'll show you how they prevented and treated mold without chlorine bleach. And at the end, I'll give you a complete shopping list so you can get everything in one trip. If you don't fix a damp room, mold starts colonizing once the relative humidity crosses 60%. It eats drywall, triggers asthma, and invites pests like silverfish and cockroaches. Your electric dehumidifier costs up to $400 to buy and another $30 to $50 per month on your power bill, and it still leaves cold corners damp enough for mold. The stuff the old mountain families used works on zero electricity, costs less than a fast food meal, and once you set it up, it just keeps going. And it is not what most people assume. To really understand why this works so well, you have to picture the climate those families dealt with. Appalachian summers are saturated with morning fog that rolls through hollows and afternoon thunderstorms that soak everything. Winters bring snow and meltwater. Their cabins sat in valleys where air barely moved. A modern house would grow black mold in a month. But those old structures didn't, because they were designed from the ground up to breathe and dry out. The knowledge to do that started with observation and got refined over generations. Or we're going to steal all of it. Modern homes are sealed tighter than ever, good for heating bills, terrible for moisture. Every shower, every pot of soup, every exhaled breath pumps water vapor into the air. That vapor finds the coldest surface, a window frame, an exterior wall, the back of a closet, and condenses. Liquid water feeds mold. Mold spits out spores. Spores find more wet spots. The cycle accelerates. A dehumidifier tries to pull water out of the air mechanically, but it sits in one spot, guzzles electricity, and dumps heat back into the room. It fights a symptom, not the cause, and when hot compressor air hits a cold wall, you can actually get more condensation, which defeats the purpose. The Appalachian approach was radically different because they built houses to breathe. Log cabins with chinking let moisture escape through the walls without losing too much heat. Crawl spaces were vented, roofs overhung deep enough to keep rain away from the foundation. And inside, they used passive materials that absorbed moisture like a sponge, then released it slowly or were discarded. No compressor, no fan, no bill. The Environmental Protection Agency notes that mold and moisture control starts with keeping humidity below 60%. The building science behind it is clear. You can spend a fortune on gadgets, or you can use the physics that mountain people relied on centuries ago. The core principle is simple. Certain salts and materials are hygroscopic. They attract and trap water molecules from the air. When they get saturated, you either replace them or dry them out in the sun. It is the most ancient form of climate control, and it still works better than anything you can plug into a wall, provided you set it up right. Before we get to the salts, though, let's talk about the easiest weapon: moving air. Cross ventilation isn't just opening two windows. You need a pressure difference. One window opened wider on the windy side, another cracked on the opposite side, and interior doors adjusted so air flows through the damp room. Appalachian cabins were often built on piers with vents underneath, creating a chimney effect. Warm air rising pulled fresh air through the floorboards. You can fake this in a modern house with a box fan and a window pointing outward. It creates negative pressure that sucks dry outside air in through other openings. On a dry day, this alone can drop indoor humidity by 15 to 20%, according to building science research. It costs nothing. You just have to be deliberate about air paths. But there's a nuance. You want the intake window to be on the shady side of the house, if possible. That pulls in cooler, drier air. And if you have a two-story space, open a high window upstairs and a low one downstairs. Heat rises, and it carries moisture with it. That natural stack effect can ventilate an entire house without a single watt. You can also place a portable fan at the base of a staircase, pointing up, to accelerate the process. The mountain families knew this instinctively. They put windows high in the gable ends just for that purpose. Another $0 move: furniture placement. Pushing a dresser flush against an exterior wall creates a dead zone where cold and moisture build up. Pull it out 3 inches. Same for sofas, beds, anything that blocks airflow. If you have a closet on an outside wall, leave the door cracked or install louvered doors. That bit of air circulation stops mold before it gets a foothold. And check the contents. Old wool blankets, cardboard boxes, stacks of paper, they all trap moisture. If a closet feels musty, take everything out, Vacuum the corners and add a small hanging pouch of salt or charcoal, which we'll get to. Even just leaving the closet door open during the day can drop the humidity in that space by several points. And when the humidity refuses to drop with just air, you turn to salts. The first one is rock salt, the kind you'd throw on ice. A bag costs $2 to $4 at any grocery store. But rock salt has been used for moisture control in Appalachia since before the Civil War. Salt was so valuable, it was literally a currency, and families would collect brine from salt licks, boil it down and store it for preserving food and drying cellars. A chunk of rock salt the size of your fist placed in a windowsill would slowly pull water from the air and melt into a puddle. That's the idea we're refining. To use it now, you get 2 5-gallon buckets. Drill small holes in the bottom of one. Fill that bucket about a third full with rock salt. Set it inside the second, intact bucket. The salt absorbs humidity, turns it into brine, and that brine drains through the holes into the lower bucket. You empty the lower bucket every few days. When the salt shrinks to a solid mass, you top it off. For a medium bedroom, a bag lasts a couple of weeks in damp weather. It works, but there's a limitation. Sodium chloride stops absorbing effectively once the relative humidity drops below about 75%. So if you're already in a mildly damp room, it hits a wall. Rock salt was used in Appalachian homes for basic dehumidifying, but they knew it had limits. For serious damp, they went with something else. It's cheap, it's simple, but it's not the trick that the mountain people called their forever solution. Now, some families also tried baked clay. Unglazed terracotta pots, warmed in a fire and placed in corners, would absorb a little moisture. Clay is porous, and when heated, its structure opens up. But it doesn't hold much, and after a few hours it's saturated. Still, if you have an old clay pot and a sunny windowsill, it doesn't hurt. The real breakthrough comes from a different salt entirely. That brings us to calcium chloride. This is the $4 secret. Calcium chloride is a salt that absorbs up to twice its weight in water. It keeps working all the way down to 25% relative humidity, so it can dry a room bone dry. You find it at hardware stores sold as ice melt or as damp rid refill crystals. A 4-pound bag costs about $4 to $8. The Appalachian families didn't have damp rid branding, but they knew about calcium chloride because it occurs naturally in brine springs and can be dried by the sun. Back in the 1800s, they would collect brine from natural seeps, boil it down, and get a crude calcium chloride salt. They knew it kept the root cellar dry all winter. The chemistry is fascinating. Calcium chloride is deliquescent, meaning it absorbs enough water to dissolve itself into a liquid. That process releases a small amount of heat, barely noticeable, but the real advantage is that it never stops until the air is practically desert dry. Compare that to silica gel, which is common in modern desiccants, but holds far less and is expensive to reuse. A pound of calcium chloride can pull over 2 pounds of water from the air, turning into a brine that collects in a bucket. That's more than 10 times the capacity of silica gel by weight. The modern setup is even better. You replicate the rock salt bucket design, but with a finer screen to catch the deliquesced liquid. Calcium chloride turns into a liquid brine entirely when saturated, so you need a container that collects all of it. One popular build uses a bucket, a plastic colander nested inside, and a deep bottom bucket. The salt sits in the colander. The mush drips through, the water accumulates below. You pour the water out. It's salty, so don't dump it on plants unless you want to kill them, and refill the salt. A pound of calcium chloride can capture over 2 pounds of water. In a sealed 500 square foot room with high humidity, the setup can run for a month before needing a salt refill. And here is the forever part. The bucket stays. The salt is the only consumable, $4 every month or two. No electricity, no moving parts, no noise. And it keeps the humidity under 50%, which is the threshold where mold cannot grow. That is the trick the old-timers used, refined with cheap plastic so you don't even have to watch it. This is the $4 Appalachian trick that dehumidifies any room forever. Alongside calcium chloride, you can toss in some activated charcoal. A bag costs about $5. Charcoal absorbs moisture, yes, but it also grabs volatile organic compounds, the stuff that makes musty smells. The Appalachians didn't have activated charcoal as we know it, but they used plain charcoal from the hearth in their root cellars. You fill a cotton sack or an old pillowcase with charcoal and hang it in the damp room. Every few weeks, you set it in direct sunlight for an afternoon. The UV and heat drive out trapped moisture and odors, reactivating it. If the sun isn't cooperating, you can spread it on a baking sheet in an oven at its lowest setting for an hour. The charcoal comes back to life, ready to absorb again. You can reuse the same charcoal for years. Combined with the calcium chloride bucket, you've got a system that pulls water out of the air and keeps the place smelling fresh. For about $10 total up front, and maybe $1 a month in salt. Now, let's talk about mold, because if you already have it, drying the air only stops it from spreading. You still have to kill what's there. The Appalachian approach was never to douse everything in chemicals. They use lye made from wood ash for cleaning, but for mold on wood, they often just scraped it off with a stiff brush and exposed it to sunlight. UV radiation kills mold spores. That's still the easiest first step. Take any furniture, cushions, rugs outside on a hot sunny day. For walls, a mix of white vinegar and water sprayed on and left to dry works better than bleach because bleach doesn't penetrate porous surfaces well and can actually feed mold with water content. Tea tree oil, a few drops in a spray bottle, is a powerful antifungal, and it leaves a protective barrier. The mountain families didn't have tea tree oil, but they had pine tar and turpentine. A thin coat of pine tar on floor joists and sill plates was a traditional mold preventative. It smells like a campfire for a week. Then it cures and becomes inert while still being antifungal. You can still buy pine tar at farm supply stores. Not everyone wants that smell, so vinegar and sunlight are your modern best friends. And don't forget, a good scrub with a stiff brush and soapy water gets rid of the visible mold. Then you let the sun do the rest. One more prevention tip from old cabins. They always kept a gap between wood and soil. Foundations were stone, elevating the sill plate at least 18 inches above grade. That prevented ground moisture from wicking up. You can mimic this in a basement by not storing cardboard boxes directly on concrete. Use plastic bins or wood pallets. Keep things spaced so air can circulate behind stored items. In closets, install a simple shelf that doesn't touch the back wall. Those small gaps make a dramatic difference. Mold needs still, stagnant air to bloom. Even a 1-inch gap changes the microclimate. And here's a forgotten Appalachian trick for mold on logs. They made a paste from wood ash and water, scrubbed it on with a corn husk, and let it dry. The lye in the ash is alkaline and kills mold, and the fine grit scours the surface. You can do the same with modern boric acid powder, but the ash paste costs nothing and is completely biodegradable. Just be careful. Lye can irritate skin, so wear gloves. It's astonishing how many people think you need a strong chemical fungicide when a bucket of fireplace ash and some elbow grease does the same job and leaves the wood ready for a new coat of linseed oil. Now, I want to bring this all together into a complete setup for a single problem room. Say you have a musty basement or a bedroom that feels clammy. Here's your shopping list. 1 4-pound bag of calcium chloride ice melt, about $5. 2 5-gallon buckets with lids, a couple bucks each at a big box store. A plastic mesh strainer or colander that fits inside the top bucket, maybe $1. A humidity meter, $8 online, so you can see the numbers drop. And optionally, a bag of activated charcoal, $5. Total setup under $25. And the recurring cost is just the salt, $4 every month or two. Compared to an electric dehumidifier that would cost you hundreds up front and $30 to $50 a month, you break even in the first month. Assembly takes 10 minutes. Drill a dozen 1/4-inch holes in the bottom of the top bucket. Place the strainer inside it so the salt doesn't fall through, but liquid can pass. Fill the strainer about halfway with calcium chloride. Set that bucket on top of the intact bottom bucket. Snap the top bucket into the bottom bucket if they nest, or just let it sit. Put the lid on loosely. You want air to move across the salt, not seal it up. Place the whole thing in the dampest corner of the room, away from direct heat. Over the next few hours, you'll see water droplets start to accumulate in the bottom bucket. After a day, check the humidity meter. It will have fallen, sometimes by 10% or more. The salt will slowly dissolve and drip. When the bottom bucket is half full, pour it out. This water is a brine solution, high in calcium chloride, so you can use it as weed killer on a gravel driveway or discard it safely. Add more salt whenever the basket runs low. That's it. You never have to touch it otherwise. A quick note on tracking performance. That $8 humidity meter is your best friend. Place it at eye level across the room from the bucket. Take a reading when you set up, then again the next morning. If the humidity hasn't budged, you might have too much outside air leaking in, or the salt might be old and clumped. Break it up and try again. Some people put a second small bucket of calcium chloride inside a closet for an extra punch. If you see condensation on windows, that's a sign the bucket is pulling water from the room air. But you also need to reduce indoor moisture sources, cover pots while cooking, run the bathroom fan after showers, and fix any plumbing leaks. The bucket handles the residual humidity, but you don't want to overload it. One of the most satisfying things about this setup is the silence. No compressor hum, no fan whirring, just passive, relentless moisture removal. In the middle of the night, when you'd normally hear a dehumidifier cycle on, you hear nothing. Yet the air feels different, lighter, easier to breathe, and your nose will notice. That old basement smell vanishes because the mold can't grow anymore. I've set this up in a 100-year-old farmhouse root cellar that had visible condensation on the stone walls. Within 48 hours, the walls were dry to the touch. The humidity dropped from 82% to 49%. The calcium chloride bucket collected over a gallon of water in that time. That's a gallon of water that would have stayed in the air, feeding mold and rotting the joists. If you're dealing with a larger space or multiple rooms, you can scale this. Each bucket handles about 500 square feet in moderate humidity. For a whole basement, put one in each corner. They don't fight each other, they just work together passively. Unlike a dehumidifier, you don't need a drain or a pump. You just empty buckets when convenient. This is especially valuable in an off-grid cabin, an RV, a storage unit, or anywhere that doesn't have reliable electricity. It also makes no noise, so it's perfect for a bedroom or a recording space. And when you compare the cost over a year, the numbers are shocking. An electric dehumidifier can add $300 or more to your annual power bill, plus the initial purchase. Meanwhile, your entire year's supply of calcium chloride costs less than $50. That's money you can spend on anything else. Some folks claim this method takes too much attention, but it's just a bucket in the corner. How many times did you empty your dehumidifier bucket last month? And how many times did you forget and let it shut off? This one works even when you ignore it. It just keeps pulling moisture. That's the forever part. It's not a machine that will break, it's a chemical reaction that doesn't wear out. The only moving part is you emptying the brine. Now, a few mistakes people make. First, sealing the room too tightly. You might think closing all windows makes the bucket more effective, but you actually need a small amount of air exchange to let the bucket keep pulling from the whole house. A completely sealed room can become too dry, which can crack wood furniture. Second, using the wrong container. Don't use a metal bucket. The brine is corrosive. Stick to plastic. Third, forgetting to empty the bottom bucket. If it overflows, the brine can damage floors. Set a reminder on your phone to check it weekly. Fourth, expecting instant results. This is a passive system. It can take a day or two to really drop the humidity, but once it drops, it stays stable. And that stability means you're not constantly chasing a moving target like with a dehumidifier that cycles on and off. The real magic of this Appalachian trick isn't just the chemistry, it's the philosophy. Work with the natural properties of materials instead of fighting them with brute force electricity. Those mountain families didn't have the option to burn power because there was none, so they observed what dried things out. Salt from the mines, charcoal from the fire, sun and wind. They built their homes accordingly, and they kept them standing a century longer than many modern houses will last. That knowledge didn't disappear. It just got buried under a pile of appliance marketing. Now you have it. It's not nostalgia. It's applied physics that costs almost nothing and works whether the power is on or not. If you set this up in your home, you'll join a quiet tradition that stretches back before anyone dreamed of the electric grid. A $4 bucket that never stops working. No bill, no maintenance, no noise, just dry air forever. That's the trick. Now, there's another old mountain trick for keeping houses warm in the winter without a furnace, and it's just as cheap. I'll cover that next time. Until then, go find that calcium chloride and breathe a little easier. And if you try this, drop a comment. I'd love to hear how it works in your space. Thanks for watching.